Hey guys, this is Mitch with FinePoint CGI, and today we're going to talk about committing an image file to your SQLite database. Now, this is an extension, if you will, of the using SQLite with Godot tutorial I did, I want to say like 6 months ago. And, I just thought it would be kind of cool to show you guys how all of this would operate. So we're going to go through the process of creating our new table. We're going to load our image into a byte array. We're going to convert that byte array over to a string, and we are going to commit that to the database and pull it back out. And we're also going to go through the process of just saving a path of a file to the database and pulling that out as well. So that way you can load a file on the user's machine as well, which is sometimes more efficient than committing the byte array directly to the database. So that's what I have in store for you guys today. Let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to right click up here. We are going to add in a child node, and we are going to add in a texture rect here. And then let's just kind of throw it somewhere in the middle here, like this. That'll work. And we're just going to leave it like that. Now we're going to go ahead and open up our script here. And we are going to go ahead and comment out this item result here. Oops, not that item result. And then what we're going to do is we are going to need to create a new function here. So let's go ahead and create our function. Func save image to DB, and we're going to pass in an image here. Next, we're going to go ahead and create our image variable. It's equal to image dot get underscore data. And actually, I think that this is probably a poor name for this. This should probably be texture. And this should be save texture to DB. And then we're going to change this to texture. That way we don't get confused later. Then what we're going to do is we're going to say var idata, so idat or data is equal to, and we're going to go ahead and create an object here. So we're going to say width, and we'll capitalize W. And we're going to do image dot get underscore width, comma, quote, height, comma, or height, colon, dot get height, like that, comma, quote, format, colon, image dot get underscore format. All right. And now what we need to do is we need to go ahead and pull our image data into a byte array. So what we're going to do is we're going to say var I bytes is equal to image dot get underscore data. Now, what a byte array is, it's an array of basically bytes. I know it's hard to explain, but basically like they're numbers almost, okay? And what we need to do is we need to convert that byte array over to a string so that way we can put it into our database. So let's go ahead and do that. So we'll say for n in I bytes. Then I want to go ahead and say, hey, actually, we're going to need to create a variable here. So var bytes. There we go. Because we need to store our bytes somewhere, right? And we'll make it equal to an empty string. Because we need to convert it to a string, so we need to create our string. And now that we have that, we can go bytes is equal to bytes plus comma plus our new n variable here. And we're going to need to cast it as a string because the byte array is an integer. So we're going, each index in that byte array is a integer, so we need to convert it to a string. And now what we'll do is we'll go ahead and add that to our iData, and we will create an instance or a index for it. We'll call it data, and we will make it equal to that bytes. Awesome. And that's going to go ahead and give us a string here that we can actually use to to insert into our database. And now everything else is basically the same as some of the code up here, where we go ahead and we insert our row here. So what we do is we go ahead and db.open _ db, and then we go ahead and do db.insert _ row, and we have a table, our table name, which in our case is going to be images, and then comma what data we're trying to insert. Then we'll insert our iData. And that should be everything that we need to do to insert a texture into our database. So what I'm going to do to test this is I'm going to come up here to the top, and I'm going to say export as a texture, and I'm going to say var texture. And then what we'll do is we'll come down here, and we're going to go ahead and call it by saying save texture to DB, and the texture that we're going to give it is texture. Awesome. So now that that's done, we're ready to test it. But hold on a minute, we can't test it without making sure that we have a table that actually has this data in it. So if we go ahead and right click our file system on data store, and we open in file manager, you'll see our database here. So let's go ahead and open up a file explorer here. We're going to go to our downloads, and you'll see all of my wonderful downloads for the last while. And I will scroll down to the last time this tutorial was made, which was, it looks like 12/19. And we will go ahead and open up our DB browser here. So we're going to go ahead and open up our database. So click open, and I'm going to come here, copy this location, and go ahead and paste it, and then click on my database. All right. So now I got my database open, I'm going to create a table. I'm going to call it images, or image. Did I call it images or image? Images. See, I did call it images. All right. Images. And I'm going to go ahead and add in a ID, not null, private key, auto increment, and unique. And then we're going to go ahead and add in a new ID. We're going to call it width. We're going to add in a, whoops, enter. Always make sure you hit enter. And then we're going to add in height. And then we're going to add in format. And then we're going to add in data. And I think width, height, format, data. Yep, so that's everything. So now that we have these, we want our data to be a type text, actually a type blob, because text allows you to put text into it, but it's only allowed for, I believe, 1 million different text fields, whereas a blob is up to like something like 1 billion or something like that. It's an astronomically large number. So if you're going to store a huge amount of data, you want to use a blob object versus a text object. Format, we're going to say, is an integer because it will give us an integer. Height is going to be an integer, and same thing with width. It'll be an integer. So we're going to go ahead and hit OK. And we're going to write our changes, and then let's go ahead and plop a breakpoint right about here where we're about to insert our data. And then let's go ahead and see what it does, because it might not work, and we should probably debug our code to make sure that everything came back properly. Okay, first things first, we got a invalid call, non-existent function, so that's good news. It says get texture from null, so, oh, that's why. So you can see here, we are passing in a null texture because if we cancel this, we click on our spatial node, our texture variable here is empty. So let's go ahead and drag in this Godot icon.png. So that way it has some data to work with. Let's go ahead and try that again and see what happens. Okay, so it looks like we made it all the way through here. And let's take a look at the data that we have here. So first, we have our image variable here where we got our texture. If you go ahead and take a look at this image variable, it is an object ID of, 1208. I mean, that's not that big of a deal, but it's something interesting that you can see that this is the actual image object here. And you can see that we have our texture object here, which is a loaded stream texture here. And if you click on the image, you can see that it's considered a resource. So it's a different type of object, and this item can be written to, and this item cannot because it is a stream texture. So that's why we switched it over to an image. Now, if we come down here and we take a look at our IDataArray, it's a dictionary, and we have our width, our height, and our format, so that's cool. So these got pulled back. We got the data properly, so that's good. And a format of 5 just means that it's a texture object. And then we have our iBytes, which is a huge pool byte array of 25,600 different entries, and they're just text entries. See that? Now it only goes down to 19, and the reason why is because Godot actually only shows you the top 20 things in your array. So if your array is huge, you're not going to see all of the variables or all of the values of this array. And then we have our bytes, which is a huge text object. So if I actually open up a VS Code here and I paste this in here and I kind of make this a little bigger for you, you'll see that if we add in our word wrap here, view word wrap, that's just how much data we're committing to the database to save our texture as a file. It's a lot of data, and you could do with some compression here, but I think that's a little beyond the scope of what we're trying to do. But that's just something to keep in mind when you're saving your texture to a database. It requires a lot of space to do this. As a matter of fact, if we actually open up Notepad, which I'm not really a big fan, actually I don't need to open Notepad, I can just save it. If I save it here and I save this as texture.txt and I just drop this in my my main desktop here, and then I go ahead and I open up, you can see all of my pictures and things like that I use for my Godot tutorials. But if I click on my texture, you can see that that's a 90 kilobit texture of 90 kilobytes of information, and that's a lot of information to be storing into a database in one field. So that's just something to keep in mind. But the point is that it worked, and we can go ahead and save this. So now we know that we have our string. It's all correct. So let's go ahead and open up our DB and insert our data. So if we hit play, it runs through. We go to our database, we go to browse data, and we pick on images. We have ID of 1, width, height, format, and we have our texture. And look at that, it's got all of the data. But you'll notice something weird. There's a comma right here. Well, we don't want that comma because that's just an empty value. So you're offsetting all of your texture information by 1, if that makes sense. You're literally taking all of your data and starting it from 1 instead of starting it from 0 because you have that empty data. If I actually change this to like 22, now there would be some kind of byte data there, and it would append that data to the byte array. But what we want is we want this, right? We want to get rid of our comma here. So what we need to do, if I go ahead and I remove this and save it, and I close our database here, or close our project here. So what we need to do is we need to convert this to a for I in range. So what we're going to do is go for I in range of iBytes dot count. I believe it's dot count. And then instead we're going to say iBytes, and then we are going to go with I. That should give us a proper range amount. Now what we need to do is we need to go, okay, now we can go ahead and try this and see what this does. And if we just put a breakpoint here so we're not throwing it into our database, we can take a look at what our stuff is. Non-existent function pool byte array. That's why. I forgot. It's dot size. So we're going to go ahead and revert or go ahead and rerun this. Let's take a look. It did not. So what we're going to do is we are going to say if I does not equal 0, then let's go ahead and append this data. Let's see if that fixes it. Well, it doesn't look like that worked either, but what we can do is we can say if I is equal to 0, what we're going to do is we're going to say bytes is equal to str I bytes I, else we are going to go ahead and append our data. And that should do it. So let's go ahead and try that. Let's see what that does. If we scroll down to our little array, you'll see that that completely ripped out our first comma that we had. So perfect. That's exactly what we wanted. Man, there's just so much data in here. All right. So now that we've got that, let's go ahead and run it through, get our data into our database. So if I refresh this, you'll see our data is in our database. That comma is gone. Perfect. That's what we want. And now what we can do is if we scroll up to the top and we comment out our save image to texture, because I don't want that to run every time. I just wanted it to run the one time, at least in this case. And if you guys want to run it multiple times, you guys can. Now what we need to do is we need to go ahead and create a function that will allow us to load that image from the DB. So load image from DB. And then what we're going to do is we are going to say db.open underscore DB. And then we will say db.query quote select star from images. And then I'm going to go ahead and just leave it at that. Now, normally what you would say is normally what you do is go where ID is equal to, and then whatever parameter you pass in. In my case, I'm not worried about that because I only have one thing in my DB. But if you guys want to add that, you guys are more than welcome to. So now what we need to do is we need to say for I in range 0, comma, db.query underscore result dot size. And then what we'll do is we'll say var width is equal to db.query underscore result. And then we are going to say I, and then we are going to say quote width. We want to capitalize our width. And I've got an error here. Oh, nope, it's good. Okay. And then I'm just going to copy and paste that a few times. We're going to change this to height. We're going to change this to format. And we're going to change this to data. And then I believe that's actually all we need. So now that we have our 4 parameters getting pulled out of the database, we need to go ahead and split our data into an array again. So var data array is equal to array data dot split quote comma. And what that's going to do is that's going to take our data, it's going to split it out into a text array. But the problem is we don't want it to be a text array. We want it to be an actual array, like a regular array, right? Because text arrays can't become byte arrays, and byte arrays can't become text arrays. And same thing with integers. Integer arrays can't become byte arrays or text arrays. Okay, so you need to cast it as an array and say this is a generic array. It is a type array. Instead of being a specific type array, it's just a random type array, if that makes sense. From there, we can go ahead and we can cast it into our pool byte array. So we're going to say var pba and pool byte array, and we are going to pass in our array, so data array. So that's going to cast it into a pool byte array. And so if I haven't explained what a pool byte array is, a pool byte array is basically an array that's designed to hold bytes. So it's really optimized for like memory usage and things like that. And generally speaking, at least in Godot, you're going to be using it for textures and binary objects. Well, actually, in most code, you use it for binary objects. Generally speaking, though, it's used for images inside of Godot. So that's just something to keep in mind. Now, what we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and create our image. So we need to create an image so that we have something to map our data onto. So we'll say var image is equal to an image, and we need to construct it. So we got to say new. And the reason you need to construct it is because you need to tell Godot to create an empty image. So think of it kind of like a black image, just something that's blank and it's empty, right? Now what you need to do is you need to say image dot create from data, and you'll see here we got a nice little thing. Well, it went away now, but we have a nice little thing that says, hey, we need to do width height if it's using bitmaps, format, and then the data. So we'll say width, comma, and there we go. So you can see it right here, height, comma. Are we using bitmaps? In this case, I don't want to, but you guys can. Basically, it generates out your bitmaps for you, which bitmaps are like lower resolution versions of the same map that you have. In my case, I'm going to say false, comma, format. We're going to pass in our format, comma, and then our pool byte array, which in our case is PBA. So now that we have this, it's going to go ahead and format and create our data for our image. Now we need to create a texture. So if you guys remember from earlier, I was saying that the difference between a texture and an image is that one is mutable and one is immutable. So one can be changed and one cannot be changed. Images can be changed, textures cannot. So once you serialize a texture and you say, hey, make this texture from image, it cannot change unless you change it by going into code and recreating it and reassigning it. So what we can do is we can go var texture is equal to an image texture here. Dot new. And then we are going to say texture dot create from image. And then we are going to pass in our texture. Now you do have some flags here, and you don't have to use any flags. You can just say 0. And there are a bunch of flags that we can use here. Like we could use like 7, which would be like making bitmaps, repeating and filtering. 1, which is like, hey, generate bitmaps. 2, which is like repeat the texture. 4, which is like magnifying the texture. 8 is anisotropic filtering it. So there's a lot of different flags here. But in my case, I'm just going to put it as 0 because there's no reason for me to have any special flags or anything like that. So now what we're going to do is we will go get underscore node. And we are going to grab our texture rect. And we are going to say dot texture is equal to our texture. Awesome. So that should set our texture rect here as that texture, which is great. Now, let's go ahead and run this and see what we get. Or did I not call it? I didn't call it. That's my fault. All right. So if we come over here and we actually end up calling it, because, you know, Godot doesn't know by, you know, it doesn't mind read with me very well. It doesn't remember that I should do this. So let's go ahead and run this. Okay, so it looks like nothing happened, but it looks like, judging by our little debugger icon, we have a little red line here, which means we have an error. So let's go ahead and click on it. Click on our errors, and it says, hey, hold on a minute. This is an invalid image. Oh, because I'm passing in texture. I should be passing an image. Goodness. Let's try that again. Let's see what it does. Okay, so now you can see that we have our texture loading from our database into Godot. Now, this isn't necessarily the best way to handle this. And this isn't necessarily the worst way to handle this. You could do some compression to make the object smaller. You could do some hexadecimal changes to go ahead and convert it from a pool byte array to hex and then insert that into the database. And that might be a little bit more memory efficient, but this is one way to handle it. What if instead we just saved our texture location to our database and we loaded that? That's more memory efficient and it's a little easier to work with than just literally saving the bytes to the database. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. So the first thing we're going to need to do is we're going to need to save our texture out to the file system, right? So what we'll do is we will say func save image to, and we're going to pass in a path, we'll say, and we'll pass in an image, we'll say. I think that'll be easier. Or a texture. I think it would be probably good to put a texture in there. And now what we'll do is we'll say var image is equal to texture dot get underscore data. And then we need to go ahead and save it. So image dot save underscore PNG, and we'll place the path in there. And then from there, we can go ahead and save our image to our location. So what I'm going to do is I'll pass this up to the top here, and we'll go ahead and mute that real quick, comment that out. We'll say save image to, and we are going to pass in our texture, and we are going to pass in our path. So in our case, let's go ahead and do c:/temp/test.png. Awesome. So that should allow us to save our image. So let's go ahead and run Godot. And it's mad at me, unable, non-existent function, get thing. Oh, because I flipped them. Whoops, that's my fault. So let me reflip these, make it so that it's not wrong. Let's do this, comma, whoops, comma, texture. All right, let's try that again. Okay, so it ran. And let's go ahead and go out to our temp folder, and you will see an image here. And you'll see my test image right here, but you'll see the other test image right here. And there we go. We've got the little Godot picture here. So now that we have that, let's go ahead and load it. So we'll scroll all the way down. We'll say func load image, and we will pass in a path, and we will say var image is equal to new, or is equal to image.new. I'm so used to C# now, it's messing me up. Var text is equal to, for texture, is equal to image texture. And then we're going to make that new as well. So we're going to create our image, and then we're going to create our image texture. And then what we're going to do is we're going to say text.create from image, and then we will say our image. And we don't need to pass in our flag. If you remember how we did that up here, basically the exact same data. And we need to make this a var. There we are. All right, so now that we've got that, what we can do is we can go, hey, get underscore node texture rect.texture is equal to text. And now if we go all the way up to the top and we paste in load image and we pass in the same exact path, actually I'll just copy and paste it. That way I don't make a mistake. And then we refresh our thing, we have an error. So let's go take a look at our error. Invalid image. And that is because I never loaded our image. Nope, I didn't create our image. So what we need to do is we need to go image.load, and then I need to pass in my path. So now let's try that again. Awesome. Now you'll see that we have loaded our image here. Perfect. So, right, we saved it out to the file system, and we pulled it from the file system into our project. Now, what we need to do is we need to go ahead and commit and load that data from the database. So let's go ahead and do that. So let's make a function called commit, image path to DB, and we'll just do path. That way we have that. And then we are going to say var I data is equal to, and we'll say quote data colon path. Whoops, no caps, path. And then we're going to go ahead and do db.open underscore, whoops, open underscore db. And then we will do db.insert underscore row. And we will say, images. If you remember, we have an images table, and we'll pass in that iData object. Great. So now if we say save image to path, let's go ahead and add in commit image path to DB, and let's pass in our path. So if we go ahead and we run this, it's going to pop up, and it's going to go ahead and load our image from our path. It's still running this load image path, but that's okay. If we go ahead and we open up our database and we refresh our table, you'll see that we have a new ID here with a C temp test PNG, which conveniently points us right to this image. Perfect, right? So now what we can do is we can go ahead and let's first clear our database. So let's go ahead and select all these and click the little clear icon and write it to our database. Now, what we can do is we can go ahead and set up our load code. So if we say func load image path from DB, and then we will say, whoops, I don't need two of them. And then we will say db.open db, db.query, select star from images. All right, actually, since I'm here, I might as well just copy and paste, do some copy pasting, because, copy pasting is always good for code, right? If I can find it. No, I have it clicked down. If I just grab this little bit of code here, all this, and I just scroll down and I paste it, and then I'll just pull out the sections that I don't need, right? So I don't really need the creating texture, and I don't really need the data array stuff, so we can get rid of all of that. But what we do need is the first half, right? First half of putting in the data or pulling out the data that we need. So what we'll do now is we will say load image, and you need to pass in a path, so we'll pass in data. All right, and then if we scroll all the way up to the top here and we get rid of load image and we say load image path from DB, when we run this, you'll see that it once again loads our Godot image, which is perfect. That's exactly what we wanted. And if we actually place a breakpoint here, we'll say right about here, we run this. All right, you'll see that when we run through this, our data has our path here, okay? And then we're passing our path into our load image here, and we are coming through here, creating our image, loading it, and then setting our texture array. So those are two ways to load images from a database into Godot. One is a little bit more efficient, but doesn't throw all the data into the database. And one is more shoving all the data into the database. So it really depends on what you want, but those are two methods. So that's all I have for you guys today. If you like this video, go ahead and hit that like button. Hey, if you dislike this video, go ahead and hit that dislike button, because I am here to make content for you guys. Now, this was a viewer request that I totally forgot about, but I finally got to it. So I do take your requests seriously, and I do get to them. So please, if you have any requests, just go ahead and throw them in the comments below, and I'll be more than happy to add it to my Trello board, which I have a link to in the description below. And that's all the tutorials that are upcoming and what I'm recording and what I'm researching and things like that. So that's always exciting. But anyway, that's all I have for you guys today. So thank you so much again for watching. and I'll see y'all next time. Thanks.